Good afternoon. This is Kiana Canada, and today we are talking about testimonial injustice and how this is related to the story of Alexander Morris. Now, if you don't know who Alexander Morris is, he is a very famous lead singer in the group called Four Tops, and they had a lot of hits that was just that hit the charts and were number one, and one of those hits was I Can't Help Myself. Remember that song, Sugar Pie Honey Bun? Da, 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 da. I can't help myself. So that was a very famous song. It was very famous in the Black American community. It's still famous today. Whenever we hear it, and whenever I hear it, like I just want to get out of my seat and dance. And so when Alexander, one day, and this happened last year, I believe, but his case is ongoing. So let me tell you about it. Last year, Alexander was having chest pains, and he has a history of heart disease. So the chest pains that he was having, I think, brought him fear. So what he did was he went to the hospital and to the emergency room and said, "Hey, like, my chest is hurting, and I have a history of heart disease, and I really want to make sure that I'm okay." And so the practitioners in the hospital asked him a series of questions. Of course, these standard questions that they ask patients or potential patients when they are being admitted or checked for a medical condition. And one of the questions that they asked Alexander is, "What's your occupation? Where do you work?" And so Alexander said, "I'm the lead singer in the group Four Tops." And so the moment that he said that, the practitioners uh, didn't believe his testimony, didn't believe his experience. And how do we know this? Well, we know this is because they left out of the room for quite some time, according to reports. And when they came back, they asked for his cell phone and his personal belongings. And so Alexander was like, "Well, why are you asking for my personal belongings? Like, what is it? What is it that you need this for?" Right? I mean, he said that he has been to the hospital before, and the times that he's been to the hospitals, they haven't asked for his cell phone. So, like, what is behind this specific ask now? And they said that they were going to be checking him into one of the facilities that deals, or he was going to be getting a psychiatric evaluation. He's going to be evaluated for a psychiatric condition. And so at that moment, Morris thought to himself, he was like, "These people think that I'm delusional because I said I'm a four top." And immediately, as a reasonable and prudent person would do, is making sense of the situation, he began to clear up confusion, or he attempted to clear up the confusion. And one of the ways in which he did this was he said, "Look, let me show you something on my phone. Let me show you something on my Facebook account. I was recently at the Grammys. I want to show you, like, I'm telling you who, so that you can see who I really am." And they were like, "No, no," they didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to hear this man's testimony. They didn't want to give credence to evidence that disputed their evidence. So this was a confirmation bias, right, that they had about this Black man that was in a hospital room complaining about a medical condition. And so the confirmation bias is that, okay, well, he couldn't possibly be having a medical condition. This is really something else. And so what is that? That's a confirmation bias, right? Okay. And what you're doing is you're closing your eyes. You don't want to see any other evidence that is going to debunk or bring down this pyramid of beliefs, this belief system that you have created about a person. And so they took his phone from him and stopped his treatment. And I want you to really think about that for a moment. What they did was they stopped his treatment. And I want you to put yourself in Alexander's shoes for a moment. You're in the hospital and you're telling hospital staff, people that are supposed to be trained to identify medical conditions accurately so that there's not any malpractice. And you're relying on them to do this, to do so, and to keep you safe. And you express to them that you are having a heart condition, that you are having chest pains, and this chest pains may be related to the fact that you have heart disease. And when you express this to them, what they then do is a discount your medical history and they fabricate a new history. So they discount the truthful and accurate history that you have and start to fabricate and manufacture a new history, but not a medical one, a psychiatric one. And so what they did, and I want you to really think about that and to contemplate on that for a moment. Think about how Alexander was feeling in that moment. Now, Alexander tells us that he was admitted, I believe, for 5 days, and it's unclear how many days that this had to do with the heart condition or how many days that he was in psychiatric evaluation. I believe that he was in psychiatric evaluation for more than 24 hours. And it could have been, I think, more than 72 hours. And it was only after he was able to reach somebody did this all this cleared up. But before it even cleared up, again, they discounted his testimony. They told him to get his black ass on the gurney or you'll be restrained. They called him schizophrenic, a man who doesn't have any history of schizophrenia. They manufactured this this mental health condition against a perfectly sane man. And he tells us in his interview that I'm going to use as the backdrop to this video, is that he tells us in that interview that they were saying that he was schizophrenic. Now think about that. You are telling the truth about your occupation, that you are a member of the Four Tops. You are telling the truth about your history and your experiences. And you're not being treated as an epistemic subject. You're not being treated as a person who's able to reason. You're not being treated as a person who's able to know. You're not being treated as a person who can perceive events accurately. you're being treated as the exact opposite from somebody who doesn't even know you. And when you try and explain to them and have a reasonable conversation with them about the facts and who you really are, and what is, as Alexander did, what's going on in his life, they're discounting that. They're not looking at that because it doesn't fit their narrative about who he is. I want you to just sit with that for a moment, because Alexander, he wasn't recalcitrant, he wasn't belligerent, he wasn't combative, he wasn't aggressive, he was not being physical. I want you to really think about what they put this man through. And I'm asking you to think about this because I want you to reflect on your own emotion about if this were you in this particular situation. And as a bystander, if you're ever in a situation where somebody their testimony is being rejected because based on their race or their skin color, or because they are a poor person, they don't have money, I really want you to think about what you could do to step in and help this person. Now, I'm talking about peacefully, not violently. I'm talking about what you can do to step in, to use your voice to say, hey, this is wrong. What you're doing to this person is wrong. And I don't think today enough people are taking a stand against this kind of persecution. And that's really essentially what it is. It was persecution of the Black experience. My heart goes out to Alexander. He rightfully addresses this situation as a racialized incident. And it was racialized because they discounted his testimony as a Black man who was able to understand events properly. And we know that to be true, that this was a racialized event. And this is not me trying to incite you to feel this is not me exciting you to feel a particular way. No, I want you to feel how you choose to feel about this situation. But how we know that this was racialized is because the nurse told him to get his Black ass on the gurney, or you'll be restrained. That's exactly what they told him. Get your Black ass on the gurney, or we're going to restrain you. And that is quite unfortunate. And it's important to understand that Black people in the United States of America, they're going through this every day. Excuse me. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. So Alexander was, of course, was able to come out of this situation not completely unscathed, but he was able to make it out of this situation because there was some celebrity there. He has celebrity. But just think, if they could do this to somebody who is a celebrity, we must think about what's being how this is impacting people with no celebrity, people who don't have a voice, people who can't speak out. I am quite certain that there are a number of people that are in psychiatric holding facilities now in the United States that are completely sane, that don't have a psychiatric condition. And we know this to be true because there have been several studies that have been done where completely sane people go into situations saying that they have a mental illness when they really don't have one, to see how the environment would treat them and to respond to them. And it's quite unfortunate that it seems to be that this is more about stereotypes than it is about really evaluating mental health conditions, to accurately evaluate somebody, to really see, like, okay, does this person really have a mental health condition? And so before we get into epistemic injustice, testimonial injustice, I just want to say this one last thing, is that I believe that Alexander has a case because under the Goldwater rule, so under this rule, right? I believe that's what it is. Let me see if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I think it's the Goldwater rule. Yeah. So under the Goldwater rules, psychiatric institutions and associations and people that are working under, you know, under these institutions and under these organizations, you have to be very careful before you diagnose a person. And there is there's ethics at play, and one of the rules is that you are not supposed to, or of course, this is actually going into international law, but under the MI principles of the United Nations, is that there should never ever be a diagnosis for a mental health condition that is based on race or ethnicity. And the Goldwater rule supports this as well, because you're supposed to base your evaluations on evidence and sound evaluations. And of course, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a medical doctor, so this is not medical advice. But as an academic, I can say that practitioners are supposed to follow the Goldwater rule and not diagnose people or misdiagnose people with psychiatric conditions that they don't have. And so this all falls back on testimonial injustice. And what is that? So we're going to be reading from this book. It's called the Routledge Handbook of Epistemic Injustice. It's a phenomenal book. It, there is a fartle of information in this book on testimonial injustice and different types of injustices that happen to everyday people. And so Miranda Fricker, she says that testimonial injustice occurs when, following an act of telling someone something, a speaker is accorded insufficient credibility by a hearer due to a prejudicial stereotype held by the hearer. And more specifically, Miranda states that the hearer subscribes at some cognitive level and in a manner that is relatively resistant to counter evidence to a widely held belief that links a salient aspect of the speaker's social identity to a disparaging attribute, as a result of which the hearer accords the speaker less credibly than she deserves. Now, let's break that down. Testimonial justice occurs when following an act of telling someone something. So, what was the act of telling someone something? The act of telling someone something in this situation was Alexander Morris told the nurse practitioners that he was a member of the Four Tops, that was his occupation. A speaker is accorded insufficient credibility by the hearer due to a prejudicial stereotype held by the hearer. So the insufficient credibility that the nurses connected to uh, Alexander Morris was based on a prejudicial stereotype held by the nurse. So the prejudicial stereotype is maybe, this man could not possibly be a member of the Four Tops. And so therefore, the nurse felt that they don't believe he's a member of the the Four Tops. And so what they're not going to do is that they're not going to really focus on his medical treatment. They're going to actually focus on the psychiatric aspect of what they believe to be going on. And so here, the hearer subscribes at some cognitive level and in a manner that is relatively resistant to counter evidence. So what was the counter evidence here? The counter evidence was Alexander saying, hey, let me show you something on my Facebook. Let me show you my profile. Let me show you me at the Grammys. That was the counter evidence that the hearer, which was the medical practitioners, that they just discounted. They didn't want to hear it. To a widely held belief that links a salient aspect of the speaker's social identity to a disparaging attribute. So they didn't, this widely held, right? This widely held belief is that African Americans are suffering from a psychiatric condition in the United States. And so they linked that to his social identity as a Black man in the hospital, that he must not be having a heart condition, that this must be a psychiatric condition. And therefore, they shouldn't focus on treating that heart condition at that moment. They should be focusing on really trying to evaluate his mental state, is where they were coming from. And so you can see that this is disparaging to the speaker's social identity, right? You can see how disparaging that this is. And of course, that is a disparaging attribute to give to a completely sane person, to say that they are schizophrenic, that they should be placed under a psychiatric evaluation. And so the hearer accords the speaker's credibility less than he deserves. So in this situation, the nurses and the practitioners, they didn't say, okay, well, let's take this man at face value and let's, maybe his experiences are accurate. So let's look at his phone. Let's see. No, they totally disregarded that. They decided, we're not going to look at that. We're not going to pay attention to that. We know what this is. We understand what this is in our mind, is what these practitioners thought and how they reacted toward Mr. Morris, which is quite unfortunate. So as you can see, this is testimonial injustice, and this often happens to a number of Black Americans. There are some extended readings that I will link in the description of this video that really ties into not only testimonial injustice, but kind of the history of psychiatric abuse against Black Americans in the United States. It's something that I'm currently researching and focusing on. It's going to be something that I'm going to be focusing my scholarship on. And I think it's a very important area of scholarship for Black Americans, and not only for Black Americans, but it's also very important for human rights organizations, not only in the United States, but also abroad, that are interacting with Black Americans. Because oftentimes there is a number of organizations that are very skilled in one area of human rights, but they're not really skilled in another area. And this is one area that I think a lot of organizations aren't skilled in. So many Black people suffer, and they're not given justice because there is not a lot of education around this particular area. There's a lot of ignorance around this area. So when a Black American complains about their experiences and complains about what they are perceiving to be an injustice, what often happens is that those experiences are often disregarded and discounted as a mental health condition, rather than the accurate depiction that the speaker is, given testimony to. So I think it's something that, as human rights defenders, as human rights organizations, as political institutions, that we really have to understand how this impacts Black Americans as a whole. So thank you for listening. Please subscribe to this channel at Real Kiana Canada. Again, this channel is at Real Kiana Canada. You can also follow me on Twitter at Kiana_Canada. Again, my Twitter handle is Kiana_Canada. See you next time.